Hello everyone, thank you for joining the lesson today. We are going to create a simple guessing game using Rust. In this lesson, we are going to go through some very important concepts. How to import external libraries, how to use enumerations, variants, and their values, but also different ways of using match expressions. First things first, we need to create the directory for our guessing game here, and we'll go to our favorite command, which is cargo new, and we're just gonna call this folder the guessing game directory. There you go. Okay, now let's browse to our source file here, main.rs. If you remember from the previous lessons, we have gone through what cargo new does and the folder structure that it creates. Okay, let's keep main for now because we will need it, and let's do some imports. First import that I would like to bring in today is our favorite standard input-output library. And then there are a couple of new libraries here that you're probably not familiar with, so I'm going to go through them very quickly. So the first one is I would like to import the standard comparison library here, CMP ordering, and I'll go through what this enumeration does. And the last one that you probably haven't seen yet, this is an external crate that we are going to import in this lesson, and it's essentially a random number generator. So these are the libraries that we are going to import today. This is the first time in the series that we are importing an external crate. So let's recall what we've done in the previous lessons, where you define these type of dependencies, i.e. this random generator crate. If you remember, we need to open the cargo.toml. There is dependencies section here, and the crate that we want to import is called rand, for short for random. And we're going to define the version. In this case, I want 0.8.3. Let's save that. Great. So let's go back to our main.rs file and start writing the program. I'm going to keep line 5, which is our main function. Line 6, which is the println macro. I'm going to change this string here from hello world to the title of our program, which is guessing game. Line 7, I am going to define this placeholder that will take a random number from the random generator library that we just imported. Okay, so I'm going to call the namespace here, go thread rng, and then it's gen range, and I want the number between 100, 1 and 100. In fact, we're going to have to do here 101 because this particular function, the lower bound is inclusive, so essentially it will give you a number between 1, and the upper bound is exclusive, which is 100. So the number that you will get is between 1 and 100, not 101. Okay, so moving on swiftly here, what we need to do is we want the user to repeatedly guess the number. So the keyword in what I just said is repeatedly. This usually means a loop with certain conditions. Now, those conditions could be until the user decides to quit the program, but in our case here, we're just going to create an infinite loop that will essentially keep asking the user to guess the number until he or she gets it right. Let's try that again. So we are familiar with the keyword loop. This will create an infinite loop for us. Again, this is not best practice, but as long as we have some safeguard in place, it should be fine. Okay, now we're gonna prompt the user for a number. And then we're gonna declare a variable here that will hold our user input. Again, you've seen this in the previous lesson. We are creating a mutable variable. Mutable means that this variable can change value during the program. String is the type, and new essentially will allocate the memory, and it will do all the essentials to have this variable hold the value for us. Okay, next we're going to call the standard library here, standard input library, and we are going to read a line from the terminal, and I will pass this guess variable that we defined at line 11. And if you recall, in the last lesson we did some exception handling. Now if you recall, read line will return a string. It will essentially fill this guess variable that we created at line 11. It will fill it with a string. However, our comparison needs to be done against an integer, right? So against this secret number that we defined at line 7. The way to do this now is to parse this string that was read from the command line using the readline function and convert it into an integer. Now the way to do that, I'll explain here why we are explicitly putting the type, this primitive type. Match, guess, trim. If you recall, trim essentially removes space characters from the beginning and the end of the string, and then I do parse. Now parse will infer the return value from what we defined here. Again, the other thing to note is that we are somehow redefining guess again. Well, we're not really defining it. In Rust, there's this concept of shadowing. It's an interesting concept here, and it's probably worth exploring in a different lesson. But essentially, it just saves us from naming this variable at line 11, for example, as guess string, and then naming this variable at line 13 as guess integer. Okay. Now, parse will return an enum. And the first enum here is one that's going to hold our value. So let's call it num. And this is an interesting match expression because it will return the value from parse for us. And if there is an error, we just continue the loop and start from the beginning. Okay, let's save this. And now let's confirm to the user with the println macro again. And we say, you guessed, placeholder, guess. Now that we've converted the string value to an integer, we need to compare it against the randomly generated number at line 7. Which is called secret number. Let's try and do that with a match again. So integers have a function here called CMP, which is compare, and it will take an argument here of secret number. So we're calling this by reference. Okay, and let's open our curly brackets. Now let's see what CMP returns, right? It's gonna return an enumeration called ordering. So at line 2 here, we saw this earlier, we imported it, and this is where we are going to make use of it. So if the number is greater than secret number generated, then we need to highlight this to the user. Okay, and we'll do that with println number too big. If the number is less than the secret number, i.e. the randomly generated number, just tell the user that this number is small. Now, if the number equals to the secret number, then the user has completed the game and we can break the loop. You won. Thank you for playing. There you go. And I notice here in line 23, I forgot to put the exclamation mark. Okay. Tell you what, let's actually break this, right? Because once we get the right answer, there's no need for the game to restart again, because in this case the user already knows the value. There's no point in us prompting the user again to enter or to guess the value, unless of course we put the line 7 inside the loop itself. Okay, so let's try and run it. I'm going to browse to my correct directory here called guess game. I'm going to do cargo run. All right, so we do have an error. Fantastic. This is the best way to learn, by troubleshooting. Line 25, expected one. So it's not liking this comma here, and of course because inside the brackets, entering a new scope, so you have to put in the semicolon. Let's do that real quick. Clear the screen and then do cargo run again. There you go. So the program has compiled successfully and it was built. Now it's prompting us to guess a number. So let's do 10. Number is too small. Let's do 50. Number is too big. Let's do 40. Let's do 45. 42. There you go. So the guess number is 42. So fantastic. That's working really well. Before we end the lesson here, I just want to go over the compare command again, right? So if you recall, we said it does return an enumeration, and this might seem confusing. So let's look at the docs, right? Let's go to compare function itself, and it's returning an enumeration called ordering. Let's take a look at what's inside ordering. So if I go to greater, really it's a simple enumeration of integer values. So let's do a hacky thing here. It's a good way to learn, right? So what if I just wanted to interpret these values, right? Just for learning here, just for education purposes, right? Well, you can actually do that yourself by just turning this into a signed integer, right? And I'll explain why signed and not integer, okay? And then let's just take a look at what the greater value. So the greater value is an integer 1, equal is 0, and then less is -1. And this is where the difference between a signed and unsigned integer is that, of course, a signed integer will include negative values. Unsigned won't include that, right? The range is bigger. Okay, so let's try and change this. So greater is 1. Less is -1, and equal is 0. Save. As you can see, it's still complaining here because of course it's expecting a bigger range, the non-exhaustive pattern error that you see there, but that's fine. We can eliminate that by going comma, then give it a default match expression here, and you can then say non-defined value, or you can put any errors, doesn't really matter for the purpose of this educational session. And let's save and do cargo run again. Okay, as you can see, it compiled successfully. Let's try and put some guess numbers there. So too big, too big, too big. There you go. So you guessed correctly. The correct number was 20. This was a quick lesson to show you how to create a simple guessing game. We've gone through very important concepts. We've imported an external library, which is the random number generator. We've used few enums like the ordering enumeration. We've used the actual variants within the ordering enumeration, which is these 3 that you've seen here: greater, equal, and less. But we also compiled the program using the value of those variants, right? So line 22, 23, 24, right? Just to show you here for educational purposes what you can do with Rust. Okay, so thank you again, and I will see you in the next lesson.